Yeah, hello there, everybody. For the third week in a row, my name is not Pete Graves. Dharmesh, Sheth, yeah. He is still on holiday, would you believe it? Still having a good time with Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, and the rest in Disneyland, Orlando. But for the third week in a row, we are joined by Transfer Talk legend / friend of the show / Pete Graves' holiday cover. I'm told here to delete as applicable, Sam. That's Sam Tighe, by the way. But I think I'm going to give you the choice. What are you? Are you a Transfer Talk legend, friend of the show, or Pete Graves' holiday cover?
Well, as much as there's plenty of people up in Newcastle that would love the title of Pete Graves' holiday cover, I'm actually not interested in it myself. And I don't think you can anoint yourself a legend. I think that's for other people to say. So that's for you to mull over, Darms, in the weeks to come. I'm going to go with Transfer Talk regular.
Okay.
Play it down.
Yeah. I thought friend of the show was stretching it a bit. Your colleague.
Oh, that doesn't bode well for my legend status.
But yeah, I think we're all over England losing now. We spoke about this last week, so we won't speak about that again. But how's your week been?
I've had a good week so far. Yeah, I spent Monday watching a ton of Riccardo Calafiori, putting a few bits together for him.
Yes.
Funnily enough, we're going to be talking about him on this show a little bit later. Tuesday, I went to Borough Market and I bought a very expensive donut.
Wow.
So
how much?
£4.50.
Wow, what was in it?
So it was a creme brulee donut. It was actually incredible.
Creme brulee donut.
Yeah,
that's why we're colleagues.
It's pretty amazing.
That's why we're colleagues.
And today is Wednesday, and I'm sat here with you. So far, I think a bit of a 10 out of 10 week.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I hope the donut was worth it. But look, we're going to talk about transfers because that's why we're here, of course. We're going to start with news that's probably going to be of huge relief to Manchester City fans. Potentially bad news for the rest of the Premier League, and that is Kevin de Bruyne is not leaving Manchester City this summer. I ain't leaving, is what he said. Well, he didn't, but you know what I mean.
He said, let me talk.
Yeah. How important is this news? And I'm asking you this question in the context of Manchester City's current development.
Yeah, I mean, you never want to say goodbye to a player like Kevin de Bruyne. We talked about what qualifies as a legend a few minutes ago in the opening of the show. Now, Kevin de Bruyne is a Manchester City legend. He is one of the best players ever to play for the club. He and David Silva and Yaya Toure, to be fair, the last 10 years have been littered with modern Man City legends, but this is their most successful period in their history, so that tracks. De Bruyne is still, I'm pretty sure, there's a fantastic footballer in there. A lot is made of the lack of intensity of the last season or so, his age, the minutes that he's played over the course of his career. Was it just me, or during the Euros was he offering little glimpses there that Kevin de Bruyne is still quite clearly Kevin de Bruyne? And you want that player on your team. You certainly don't want him playing for anybody else. And the emotional attachment that City have for him is so strong. One more year of Kev is great news for City, for sure.
Yeah, you touched on it there. His age. Yeah. I'll also mention his injury record as well of late. And throughout his City career, admittedly, he has had a few injuries. And we do know that as much as they want to keep Kevin de Bruyne forever, it isn't going to happen. Is there a replacement for him when you think about life after Kevin de Bruyne? Or do you just accept City will have to play in a different way once Kevin de Bruyne eventually leaves?
I mean, you can try and replace him in the market, but it takes someone special. I think what works for City here and what works in their favour is that they had to battle through like half of last season without him anyway. So he got the hamstring injury in the Champions League final, and then he re-injured the hamstring on the opening night of the season last season, and literally missed the next 4 months. Like, he didn't return until 2024. Now, in that time, they won 19 games of football, which is the vast majority of games that they played across all sorts of different competitions. So it's not like City haven't been given this conundrum before, and it's not as if Pep Guardiola cannot solve this problem with the current squad. They can play without Kevin de Bruyne, and they can win without Kevin de Bruyne. It's possible. But coping through the course of a season and actually then future planning that situation, they are different stories. And I just wonder, as it starts, look, he's in the last year of his deal. This is it, right? This is surely the last year of De Bruyne. There was a question as to whether he would even play this year. Looks like he will. But at the end of this season coming, so 2025, De Bruyne is presumably going to be out of City. They need a plan in place. And they need to be looking at the very top of the market. They need to be looking at Florian Wirtz at Bayer Leverkusen. They need to be looking, maybe even this summer, I would suggest, at Dani Olmo at around 60 million euros, which they have said they're not, well, reportedly, they are not interested in. That surprises me. They should be looking to future-proof this 1 year ahead, not having to dive into the market next year and going, oh, De Bruyne's gone. Right, who can we spend 80 million on? Because that is how much money it's going to take to replace a player of this quality.
I mean, this is not like for like, obviously. I mean, who is in the Premier League? But the name Eberer Eze doesn't go away. We do know about all of his qualities. I'm not saying, in there as a long-term replacement for Kevin de Bruyne. They're completely different players. But the type of player he is an ideal fit for Manchester City.
Well, I think he's a player that will work for Pep because he's so good in tight spaces. And so when you have a player like that who's really wriggly and has those dribbling qualities, I think that's a player that Pep is generally attracted to, and that's a player that can always work in that high possession system. So, yeah, I mean, Eze is fantastic. You would worry about him stepping into De Bruyne's shoes just because the shadow he casts is so large. But I can see where they're going with that for sure. And they might have to get creative because if Wirtz is not possible and if, Olmo's not possible, like they're going to run out of options pretty quickly and they're going to have to find another way around it. The other option, of course, is to be like, well, Bernardo Silva now plays centre mid because he hasn't really done that for a while, or not consistently. And maybe they have to look in-house and start rejigging things around the edges, as they often have done.
And let's not forget Phil Foden.
And let's not forget Phil Foden.
He's quite good. Yeah. One thing I will say, Pep Guardiola said that the City squad is 85, 90, 95% going to be the same next season as it was last season. Now, given other clubs like Arsenal, they've challenged the last 2 seasons and they got even closer last season to closing that gap on City. With all of that in mind and what Pep has said there, should there be any element of concern if you're a Manchester City fan?
Well, I think we've talked about it in the past on this podcast, haven't we, Dimes? I've often, not often, but I have at times thought that maybe City were a bit light in numbers heading into a season. I've said it a couple of times, and they've just about got through, but they've skirted quite close to the line on occasion, and they're threatening to do so again by not recruiting as many players as you generally would expect a team of this size and of this wealth to do so. But I think this is just something we've become accustomed to. High turnover in a City squad is not something we really see. They make a couple of additions and they let a few go. There does seem to be, every year, a name that pops up that City are like, well, fine, we don't have use for you anymore, you can go. Joao Cancelo was the one last year. And again, what's happening with him this summer? Because he has not returned to Barcelona. What is Cancelo's future? Julian Alvarez is another name we need to keep an eye on. Was consistently linked to Atletico Madrid earlier in the summer. It's gone a little bit quiet. It's gone to the Olympics. You don't tend to let players that you are relying on go to the Olympics. That doesn't really happen. Usually they request and you say, absolutely not, mate, you're not going. So there is potential for Guardiola's claim here of 85, 90, 95% squad is going to be the same to be debunked in a way that he probably did not foresee. Because we have to add in Edison to Saudi Arabia as another potential exit. This quote might end up being wrong for reasons he cannot control. And then suddenly we are in that squad churn. But generally speaking, this is the City way, 2 in, 2 out. Nothing much changes.
Yeah, and if you look back when Manchester United were at their peak, it seemed to be Sir Alex Ferguson's way as well. There was always that phrase, wasn't it? It's evolution, not revolution. Once you start having revolution, then something along the line might have gone wrong. So hence why what you mentioned there, they always just seem to lose to bring into. Yeah. But
when you consistently score 90 points or more, like 91 last season, and then there was a track record of 96, 97, 98, you don't need to change very much. You need to change a bit to stay a little bit different, to be 10% different, to stay on top, so that you don't go stale, so that opponents cannot game plan for you and you cannot become predictable. And Pep is the master of doing just enough that's different to keep his team a little different so that he can stay on top. But he knows that he doesn't need 5 new players every year. It's ridiculous to claim that they would if you are consistently hitting 90 points.
You mentioned Kevin de Bruyne there and saying, but look, could effectively be his last season at Manchester City. The huge issue hanging over City aside of Kevin de Bruyne is probably a bigger one, and that's the uncertain future, or how it's perceived to be, of Pep Guardiola. Now, if it's hard to replace De Bruyne,
yeah,
it's going to be impossible for City fans to think about life after Pep, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think they want to think about that. They've been trying not to think about that for a few years. And these rumours, they do crop up. It gets a bit noisy around this time of year. Anytime he hasn't signed an extension, it starts to get a bit of fear creeps in. Maybe some of that has been premature. But for the first time, I'm thinking this might be it. I'm looking. He's also got a year left, right?
Mm.
He and De Bruyne leaving together is a double hammer blow, and them doing so simultaneously would leave a lot of fans in a very emotional state of mind. So you don't want to think about that because the only way from Pep is down. There's no one better. There's probably no one equal. So you're going to get worse. So really, if this being potentially De Bruyne's last season and maybe even Pep's last season, go ahead and make it count.
Yeah, one thing I would say is when he made that statement that he was nearer to the end than he was to the beginning, I think what he meant by that was he's been there for 8 seasons.
Yeah.
And probably he's not going to be there for another 8 seasons.
That means he could be there for 14.
It could. So, well, let's let that one unfold, because what tends to happen with Pep Guardiola, he will make his own mind up. He's his own man. And if he's feeling, right, I'm tired, rather like Jurgen Klopp, I need a break, he will do it. But if he thinks, batteries are recharged, like he's been speaking in pre-season,
okay,
then
we'll see.
Good news for City, potentially.
He took a sabbatical that year, didn't he? Remember?
Yeah.
Just like Pete Graves is currently on a sabbatical. He's been away for about a year.
Oh dear. Right. Okay. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few weeks with City. What has been interesting at another club is the amount of business being done in and out at Aston Villa. Now, since we last did the podcast, Amadou Onana's £50 million move from Everton has been confirmed, which we expected it to. We spoke about him last week, but I want to ask you more generally, because we did this on Sky Sports News, and I was pretty eye-opening, actually, because every single signing that they've made is 23 years old or below, barring Ross Barkley, which I think was kind of a unique market opportunity, given
it's a very cheap deal,
and given how he performed last season for Luton. There seems to be a clear method here behind Villa's dealings. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. The method has been slightly different depending on if you're in June or July, because they did obviously have to battle some PSR concerns, and they did very well with that in terms of manoeuvring out of that hole. Douglas Luiz is a big loss, but they've got a couple of good players in return from Juve and some money, and they've done a few interesting deals elsewhere as well. But you're right, the age profile of the squad is coming down. I don't know if this is just a simple case of Villa being typically smart, because most good teams now try to aim for this age bracket, because you get resale value later on and you don't necessarily get saddled with a big wage packet. But it feels like Villa have been burnt a little bit, maybe under the Steven Gerrard era, where they did pick up some very expensive or very high earning 30-something players that are still there. And I think in an ideal world would not be there. So Philippe Coutinho has not really played for Villa and has now gone on loan to Vasco back in Brazil. So they weren't able to shift him permanently. Clearly they would have liked to. I think Diego Carlos is another one who they're open to offers for, but they're not getting what they want, and he's on a big wage. And so Villa's squad cost, the wage turnover is quite high. It's very high, actually. It's been a bit of a problem for them. They're having to negotiate. The best way to address that is to get the high earners off the books. But if the high earners are 30, 31 and they've dipped a level, you can't get rid of them. The remedy to that is to sign Ian Maatsen, Amadou Onana. They're all 22, 23. The wages are typically a bit lower, and the resale value is there if possible. So, look, I've been impressed. They've been forced to do a lot of business. We talked about it with City. The squad turnover can be a bit dangerous. Pep he likes 2 in, 2 out. Alex Ferguson likes 2 in, 2 out. What Villa have done here, don't underestimate that this has unsettled a team. There's a lot going in and a lot going out here. Like Musa Diaby, John Duran, Douglas Luiz, all these players out and a bunch in. They're an unsettled team right now. This is not building off a great season into fourth. This is kind of resetting. And it's very interesting to see how this plays out. They've got 3 pre-season games in America coming up in the next sort of 10 days. I'm fascinated to see what they look like, because not a soul on earth can tell you what the plan is here without seeing it.
Yeah. Well, we'll come to Musa Diaby in just a moment, but an interesting report this week, and a few reports are linking this player with Aston Villa, was Joao Felix. Now, he doesn't obviously fit into that, what we've just been talking about, the 23-year-old and under, but
He's not
a player...
He's not much older than that, is he?
But I mean, look, he's a player that Unai Emery knows very, very well. Is he a good fit? Is he what Villa need?
So it seems pretty obvious that Unai Emery wants a player like this. Whether it's Joao Felix or not is a different question, but it's clear that he is pining for, I call them lock pickers, a number 10 who can pick the lock, someone who has that creative eye and that killer pass and can play up against a low block or a deep block and find a way through in a way that often clubs will struggle to. There's been relentless links over the last 12 months to Alex Baena of Villarreal, and he is a similar player. And if I were Villa, I would be going for Dani Olmo. Like, I would be trying. I appreciate he might be out of their range, but if no one else is interested, if City insist on not getting involved, like, just go for it. He is one of those players. It seems clear that Emery wants a player like this. Felix is obviously very expensive. Maybe not in transfer fee, but just like the entire financial package would undoubtedly be a very, very big acquisition. So that is probably where they're just counting the pennies and just checking as to whether or not this is actually realistic, and maybe waiting Atletico Madrid out a little bit on the price.
I've just checked, he's 24.
He's 24. He was so close to your age bracket.
He was, and because that surprised me. It feels like he's been around for so long, but you forget when he burst onto the scene, in inverted commas, he was a very, very young man.
But he still is. This is the nature of it when players start at 17. You know, in 4 years' time, you'll be sat here telling me that Pedri, oh my God, how is he only this? Yeah. And I had this moment the other day when Pierre-Emile Højbjerg's move to Marseille was confirmed. I was like, wow, he's getting on a bit. He's not. He's 28.
Yeah.
I was thinking he was 31 or 32, but Højbjerg was first team football from 17.
Goodness me. Shows how old we are. I think that's the conclusion of that. Yeah. I did say we'd mention Musa Diaby. He's on his way out. £50 million. Al Ittihad. It was a club record deal last summer. I know we touched on him briefly last week, but now it looks like he's gone. Are you surprised?
I'm not. This is a really difficult. It's so hard to gauge Musa Diaby and the situation. I think ultimately this is a market opportunity for Villa that has been quite wisely taken. Diaby was okay last year. He disappointed a little bit in terms of expectation, but he was consistently fit. He played in every single Premier League game, albeit 13 were as subs. But he was always available and always there. And he got 9 goals and 8 assists in all competitions, which is not bad for a 24-year-old, first season Premier League adapting. And there was an expectation that he would take a bit of a leap in year 2. But Villa have decided to cut that short. I assume because 50 million on the books does a hell of a lot for you in terms of PSR. And while there's no pressure right now on Villa because they've got past that deadline, there might be pressure next June unless they do this. Unless Diaby and John Duran go and make 100 million, they might force themselves into a sale next June. So I think they're getting ahead of this, and I think it's pretty smart. Diaby was not a key player for Villa last season. He was not a squad player. He was not a key player. He was somewhere in the middle. If you get the opportunity to make 50 million, or book 50 million for a player who is not an automatic starter, I think you have to take it. I think that's the simple game.
Now, let's go to Arsenal. It's a player we have been talking about throughout this transfer window. It is Riccardo Calafiori. Arsenal, we understand, are finalising that deal. Mikel Arteta claims they are looking to strengthen in certain positions. Now, every Arsenal fan I speak to, it's not the first position that comes to mind when they are looking to see what players Arsenal are going to sign. Was centre-back an area that jumped out at you that Arsenal you were thinking Arsenal need to bring in a player there?
No, but I don't think he's going to play centre-back for Arsenal. At least not in the beginning anyway. I think he's going to end up playing left-back, and that's where he gets his early minutes, which might be a bit of a strange one for him. It might be seen as a bit of a regression for Calafiori, who used to be a left-back, has now blossomed into a fantastic centre-back, and might just be put back out on the left. But as we well know, the left-back role for Arsenal, it's not a normal left-back role, is it? It involves overlapping, underlapping, moving into midfield and operating as a centre-back of sorts at times. It's actually quite a tough role. Asking a player to do all of that stuff, it's asking a lot. There aren't many people who can do it. And I think they've got a number of players on the books who have done bits of that. So everything I've just described, Zinchenko inverts into midfield really well, but lacks defensively. Kivior is very solid, but can't move into midfield. They have a lot of players who can do some of these things, but I don't think they have anybody who can do all of it. And I think in Calafiori, they've just seen a player who has suddenly appeared. I say suddenly. He was very good for Bologna last season. But it's become a market opportunity, and they've gone, well, it's not the weakest position in the squad, but I'm not sure we can pass this up. That's where I am with that. And they probably do still need to make a couple of signings in more problematic areas. They're not light on players. But I just wonder if they've looked at Calafiori and thought, he's actually everything we want. He's Ben White, but left-footed. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, Arsenal, it's interesting how they're approaching this transfer window. And just referring back to what we were saying about Pep Guardiola and how little it seems as it stands, how they're going to evolve the squad that they've got just now. How big an opportunity do you think this window is now for Arsenal to maybe turn from a really close challenger to becoming the ultimate champions of the Premier League?
Well, they're getting closer and closer, aren't they? 89 points last season, 2 points off City. The gap was bigger the season before when they put up a really good fight. So you get the impression that the overtake is coming. However, I would just say there's no rush. Like, if Arsenal were looking at the City situation, they're looking at potentially Kevin de Bruyne and Pep Guardiola moving on within a year or two. There is no rush to make this season the one. The best thing Arsenal can do is build a sustainable, title-challenging team that for the next 10 years is at the top of the Premier League. They don't have to risk their assets or overspend or overextend in order to win the next Premier League title. As tempting as that will be, because the last 2 years have been really emotionally tough for Arsenal fans because they've come so close and yet they haven't actually achieved what they want. So I think Arsenal will just be cool, calm and collected in the market. They'll continue adding pieces. They'll probably sell a few players to make room for another couple of very strong signings. I expect them to sign a couple more players who are 40, 50, 60 million pounds each, like really good players. And they'll fund that by moving on Smith Rowe and Reece Nelson and Eddie Nketiah and the guys we've been talking about over the course of the summer. But I don't think they're going to overextend. I don't think they're going to go, well, if we just get that striker, then that's it. And then spend 100 million on him. I'm not foreseeing that. I think they're smarter than that. And they know that their time is coming. But I know it's just really hard to be patient because you want that trophy.
Yeah, and it's difficult because they've got a team in front of them at the moment that is breaking all kinds of records in Manchester City. And I'm sure Arsenal are aware of that. And what you've said there is probably the attitude that they're taking.
I'd hope so.
To have a longer term vision rather than let's win the next title.
The only thing that can change that is if suddenly some of the key players they're building around and relying on now, there's a threat that they might leave. And that creates a success window. So like William Saliba is unbelievable. There's every chance that in the next 2 years he'll be recognised by everyone as the best centre-back in the world. What if Real Madrid start? That's what starts to create windows where you need to act. But at the moment, I don't think Arsenal are under any external pressure where they might lose any of their star players. They can just continue to add pieces and build something sustainable. It changes if Real Madrid, for example, go, we quite like the look of William Saliba. That's where it starts to get dicey. But for now, there's no worry of that.
Right, let's talk Chelsea, Sam. It's an interesting development this week when the club flew out for their pre-season tour and one of the players not on the flight was Trevoh Chalobah. He actually performed pretty well from memory at the back half of last season. He's now likely to leave the club because I think it's been made clear that they've got quite a number of central defenders who are going to be ahead of him in the pecking order. We know that Fulham are keeping an eye on his situation, but he's been at Chelsea for 17 years. People forget this. Now, is this brutal or should we just accept that this is how Chelsea are doing things now?
This is brutal and it's really sad. Mostly, so 17 years at Chelsea, boyhood fan of the club, come through the academy, great. They gave him a 7-year deal in 2022. It was the current ownership group, Todd Burley, Clearlake Capital. They gave him that deal, 7-year deal. Academy graduate signs 7-year deal at the club he supports. It's beautiful until it's not. Until a couple of years on, things change. And, Chelsea fan, a lot of Chelsea fans are really upset by this. Like really, really upset by this. And I saw a report yesterday that Trevor Chalobah thinks he's being forced out of the club, and not taking him on a pre-season trip when he's fit would absolutely do that for you. That's exactly how that would make you feel. They have Badia Shil, they have Levi Colwill, they have Wesley Fofana back to fitness. They've signed Tosin Adarabioyo. They have Disasi 5. They don't need 6 centre. No one needs 6 centre backs. Arguably, you don't even need 5. So he's looking like the odd man out, and I think we all know why. It's because in this age, you churn out the academy products and then you sell them because they represent pure profit on the books. And it's very, very sad. There's no other way to put it, because he's good enough to play for this Chelsea team, no question. And if the academy player is good enough, he should be in the team. But that's not what's happening.
How would you just overall assess this Chelsea model? It's very difficult to assess it because there have been good signings, but there have been instances where people can see exactly what they're doing. And you mentioned the sales of academy products and in some cases, it's almost been forced upon them.
I think what really rankles with the Chalobah stuff is that not only are you robbing the fans of identifying with that player and watching that homegrown hero play for your team and connect you to your club, it's that the money that they generate from a potential sale for Chalobah and for the players that they've sold in the past through the academy, where does it actually go? It goes on, for a start, it goes on about 40 players because they've just been buying and buying and buying and buying. So it's very difficult sometimes to see what the actual goal is. But you look through some of the signings they've made over the last couple of years. Yeah, Angelo, Brazilian winger who then ends up on loan in France. David Washington, Cesare Casadei, Slanina and Petrovic and Robert Sanchez, and now apparently a new goalkeeper, Philip Jurgensen, is being targeted. Why 4 goalkeepers? Why all of these wingers that are probably never going to get into the Chelsea team? Now, there are some exceptions, like Kendry Paez looks amazing. Willian Esteval looks like a potential Endrick level talent. That stuff, fine. But when you sell off Chalobah and then you use the money to buy a series of £13 million wingers that are likely never going to play for the club, where does that leave you? No wonder the fans are like, well, what's the point in all this? What are we doing?
Yeah. It's always very newsworthy, Chelsea. That's why we keep talking about them. And it's going to be very, very interesting what happens in the last few weeks, as is what's going to happen at Manchester United. I want to start with Jadon Sancho. Now, he's been back training with the first team squad. Supposedly, they've made up, he and Erik ten Hag, but it hasn't stopped other clubs being interested in him. Juventus are keen, Borussia Dortmund are keen, and the latest club now is Paris Saint-Germain. Now, if a deal was to materialise with Paris Saint-Germain, just from what you know about PSG, from what you know about Jadon Sancho, is that a good fit? How does he fit?
Well, there's a nice opening for him. A certain Kylian Mbappe left this summer. there's quite a big hole on that.
Easy, no pressure.
Yeah, there's quite a big hole on that left flank, which I think they spent the first stages of the summer attempting to fill with Kvara from Napoli, but he looks like a very expensive potential acquisition, maybe 100 million euros, and Jadon Sancho would come along a bit cheaper. And so I think this is actually quite a nice solution for both clubs, to be honest with you. Sancho is a very good player, hasn't necessarily been given the opportunity to show it, or hasn't shown it in the Premier League so much, but I think we know from his time at Dortmund, and we know from the pedigree of player that he is, that he could go to that PSG side and he could have a wicked and wonderful time. He really could. So I quite like it as a solution for all the parties. I do.
A wicked and wonderful time, rather like what we're having right now, Sam. I like that phrase. As far as incomings go, United looking at a number of midfielders, and it's in keeping with how they're approaching the transfer market compared to previous windows. They are looking at various targets in the same position so that if one doesn't work out, they can easily move on to another player that they would have done a lot of work and due diligence on. And talking about that,
So I love the way we put that strategy forward. which is completely standard, by the way.
Of course it is. But
United in the past have not done that.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Because we always associate in the past few windows, Manchester United and long-running transfer saga go hand in hand. They want to avoid that. And the midfield is a case in point. Paris Saint-Germain's Manuel Ugarte, Monaco's Youssouf Fofana is another name that's emerged. A permanent deal for Sofiane Amrabat hasn't been ruled out either. Who would you say is the best or are the best options if the likes of Casemiro and Scott McTominay were to leave? Because we understand that any incomings could be dependent on one or both of those guys leaving.
I think Youssouf Fofana is a really good player. I think he'd be a really nice partner for Kobbie Mainoo. So that would be my top choice there. And he's been available all summer. He's got 1 year left on his deal at Monaco. And they made it pretty clear in about May, actually, even before the Euros kicked off, because he went to the Euros with France. Yeah, he's available. Like he's on the block.
It'd be a lot cheaper than Ugarte.
He would be a lot cheaper. And I think like about half the price, probably. Like 30, 35 million euros might get it done for Youssouf Fofana. There are other clubs in the equation, which does make it a little bit more difficult. I know that he was on Villa's list very early in the summer before they plumped for Onana. He's on Milan's list right now, but we know from the experience this summer with Xerxes that they struggle to get some deals done sometimes. So there will be competition, but Fofana is a really nice player, really good midfielder, and I think he would be a better shout than Amrabat, who I know there's a better version of him out there. I know we didn't see it, but I wouldn't want to risk or bank on that appearing. I'd be a bit scarred by what we saw last season. And Ugarte is more of a risk, more expensive and more of a risk. I think he's found the step up to the top 5 level of European football actually quite difficult. He was amazing at Sporting in Portugal. He started quite well at PSG last season, and sort of just fell off a bit. And they weren't trusting him in the big games towards the end of last season, which is a little bit of a red flag.
Yeah, look, United have been busier more than most, both incomings and outgoings. Lenny Euro, we know, has arrived. Joshua Zirkzee, of course, has arrived. You mentioned him just there. Are you impressed with this new look United and how they've started, and what represents success for United next season?
I mean, I think you sort of mentioned earlier with Aston Villa and the age bracket that they seem to be recruiting in, somewhere in the early 20s. And I think United have tried to flip their strategy towards that as well, where possible, seemingly. I mean, they are buying players here who are top potential and potential resale value. And we're coming off the back of probably 5 years of plasters and patches for Man United in the transfer window. I think Sofiane Amrabat on loan is a perfect example of that. But going back before that, it's Varane at the end of his career, it's Casemiro at the end of his career, there's Ibrahimovic at the end of his career, it's Cavani at the end of his career. Like there's been a lot of that, and not a lot of who can we get who can anchor this team for 10 years. And it does feel like they are starting to move towards that, possibly thanks to the new ownership. So that's a good thing. And what was the other question?
What represents success for them next season?
So, depending on the person, I mean, obviously, sometimes it's a results business, and they're going to need to do better in the table than they did. I want to see better performances. I think even if they finished in roughly the same position, 5th or 6th or something like that, didn't qualify for the Champions League, but played football that was befitting a top team, not conceding 25 shots a game, basketball games left and right, 20-yard gaps between the defence and midfield line. None of that. That has to stop. The performance levels have to get better. You need to draw a line in the sand and fix that, because that was really bad. It was not befitting of a top team. So I think they go hand in hand, really, don't they, those two things? The better performances should lead to better results. But when you're Man United and you have some really good players, that doesn't necessarily carry. Sometimes you can just get away with it. But you can't get away with it for 2 years. So I think that's the actual marker for United this season, for me personally. It's performance levels. It's not conceding 25 shots. It's convincing victories. And then the rest will take care of itself.
Just before we go, Sam, a couple of interesting lines that emerged this week. The Championship Player of the Season, Crescencio Somerville, West Ham, Fulham, both interested. Just on a general theme, there seems to be a lot more delving into the Championship, doesn't there? That can only be a good thing, can't it?
Definitely keep the money in the pyramid for sure, and you never know exactly like what in every transfer. I'm sure some people know, some people don't, but with every transfer that happens, often on a major scale, every former club that player has played for, they get a little piece of the pie. Sometimes it's only 1% or 0.5%, but if a player comes up through the football pyramid, up through the ladder, ends up in the Championship and then moves to the Premier League, a lot of clubs benefit from this. So this is really good for the English game. Not wanting to sound just like the song, but it's good. It's good for the English game. And I think with the Championship, it's just proven to be a really, really easy transition for these players. They're already accustomed to English football. They're already accustomed to the weather, the culture, how hard some of the tackles are. I once interviewed Harvey Elliott just after he'd completed his loan at Blackburn Rovers, and he was just heading back into the Liverpool team off the back of it. I asked him about the experience in the Championship, and he said the state of his legs at the end of some of these games was something to behold. And once you've been kicked up and down the pitch 46 times in the Championship, you can do anything. It's more or less what he said, which I found, first of all, highly amusing, but second, very illuminating. Like, Crescencio Somerville will be fazed by nothing because he's played a bit in the Premier League, dropped into the Championship, player of the season, kicked up and down the pitch, super skillful winger, overcame it, goals and assists galore, nearly got promoted. He'll be great. And I think teams know that. And I think teams know that centre-backs in the Championship, they take to the Premier League like a duck to water. There is no problem. Go back to Harry Maguire. Step up into the Premier League, no problem. This is an easy pathway, a very easy pathway. There are very few risks involved here if the player's good enough.
Okay, just using the Championship as a theme, this will be probably a 1, 2 or 3 word answer, I think. We saw last season all 3 promoted teams unfortunately went back down in Luton, Burnley and Sheffield United. Leicester, Ipswich and Southampton have come up. Who stays up?
It's not going to be a 3-word answer, sorry. Leicester have the best squad, but with this possible points deduction hanging over them, it's really hard to have faith in their survival capacity. I'm a bit worried for Southampton's style and how it may prove to be somewhat naive because they want a lot of possession and it doesn't necessarily follow that team is able to cope. Which leaves me looking at Ipswich Town, which I think is the heartwarming answer. But I think in Kieran McKenna, they have a manager who is probably better equipped to deal with the stylistic change. And I have a lot of faith, actually, in some of these signings and some of these players that can step up. I never thought, I didn't actually think I'd be sat here saying that, but right now I'm looking at Ipswich Town as the most likely. What do you think?
Okay, so for the record, we will come back to this at the end of the season.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, Leicester and Southampton fans, but Sam, I reckon you're going down.
No!
Oh!
No!
Whoa. Baby, calm down. But yeah, no, I see what you mean. I think they've all got a chance of staying up.
Oh, come on!
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
But
compared to last season, a lot of people thought...
Yeah, the bottom three were my bottom three.
I think they look more equipped than the other 3 did last season, simply because Leicester and Southampton come straight back. And Ipswich, I've been really impressed with the moves that they're making in the transfer window so far. And they're still going for other players. Sammy Smodics is another player. We're talking about players coming in from the Championship. But... yeah, so I'm sitting on the fence. So,
of course you are.
Yeah.
Of course you are.
But Sam, it's been an absolute pleasure once again. 3 weeks in a row. And next week, we welcome back Pete Greaves. And with that in mind, I just want to say thanks to all our viewers for listening. It's been absolutely wonderful having you here, Sam. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, in your cars or on the train, in the wind or in the rain, in your house or in the shed, on your couch or in your bed. I'll definitely be listening to this in my bed. In the hills or in the valleys, in the streets or in the alleys, out for a run or maybe a walk. Be a walk, I think. Thanks for listening to Transfer Talk.
And that's for sure.